This is the Australian Army's primary standard issue infantry rifle, the AUG, and while many nations have moved away from the Bullpup rifle design over the past 2 decades, so far they've remained a die-hard fan. Why is that? How does this weapon suit the kind of tactics they use? And could it be replaced by a new 6.8mm round similar to what America's looking at? The AUG is short for Army Universal Gewehr in German because it was originally produced in Austria in the late 1970s as a kind of futuristic material, lightweight rifle that felt like you could one-hand the thing from the hip while slaying baddies. You didn't even have to flick the bean of the selector switch to change fire modes.
How does that work? Where you get your semi-auto is a 5-pound trigger pull, and then when you want to dump it, you squeeze 10 pounds and the gun just keeps going.
It's a fancy futuristic 2-stage trigger. It was a trendsetter, ahead of its time, because in 1977, the Austrian army took the leap of faith and became the first military force in the world to adopt the Bullpup rifle as their primary combat weapon. I found this incredibly intuitive, easy to use. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it was originally developed for a conscript army.
Basically, the Austrian military is kind of a like civil service type military. During the Cold War, they basically were expecting to go at it alone. So a lot of the youth is drafted, civil service, and they want to make it as simple as possible for someone who's only going to be in the army for a few years, and do their time.
Which explains why I was able to master it so quickly. When the thing didn't explode in their faces, other militaries took notice and a ton of different countries followed them. You had the Chinese QBZ-95, the Israeli Tavor, the French FAMAS, and the British SA-80. The Bullpup was the new kid on the block and everyone wanted a piece. But like with many things in life, success can be a fleeting fickle. Many of these same nations would later switch to traditional firearms. That's some subtle foreshadowing for what's happening later in the episode in the story. But first, I want to tell you about the folks that sponsored this video, Odoo, a business management software designed to simplify your workflow so you can spend time on the things that really matter. I'm always looking for new ways technology can help streamline my workflow and business processes. And with Odoo's suite of apps, online tools, and software, I won't have to worry about that. They've developed over 30 main applications. That's right, 30. Everything from accounting to social media marketing and website creation. And the best part is that it doesn't matter how small or big your business is, you can customize it to fit all your business needs. On top of that, all the apps talk to each other, so you don't have to have different softwares for different companies. You can start with your first free app completely free. You don't even need to drop a credit card number, and that first app is free for life. Honestly, their platform's end user interface is so intuitive and easy to use, it makes menial clerical tasks like accounting almost fun. And that's big coming from me because I hate math. So for guys like me, whether it's an all-in-one e-commerce hub to track sales of these sweet t-shirts, get yours today, or tracking payments to my awesome freelance collaborators, Odoo has got me covered. So check them out at odoo.com. Australia's journey from the Austeyr AUG began in the 1980s when their defense force was looking for a modern lightweight rifle to replace aging inventory of the heavier L1A1s that fired the full powered battle rifle cartridge. Compared to that chonky bad boy, you can see why the AUG looked so hot and spicy at the time. It laid down 740 rounds of 5.56 in a minute at 970 meters per second, only weighing about 7 pounds. But the real miracle was that it was 27 inches long, or 2.5 feet about, compared to the lumbering 3 feet 9 inches of the L1, because their government was able to secure a licensing agreement that allowed them to produce their very own locally adapted versions. Meanwhile, the contract being offered up by Colt, who manufactured the M16s, wouldn't allow that. Plus, the Australian military's internal testing favored the performance of the AUG. People debate those test data, but the point is they wanted that AUG. It was kind of a long game play on their part. This was a strategic decision as much of a tactical one. It gave the Australian forces a boost to their nation's domestic arms production capabilities. which is something that will remain important in the story. The original variant is known as the F-88, and production started at the Lithgow Small Arms Factory in New South Wales. This is a legendary small arms plant that's been open since 1912. It's legitimately historic. This factory pumped out 640,000 of the Lee Enfield rifles from World War I to World War II. From Australia's perspective, producing weapons domestically is important from a national security and a strategic autonomy point of view. The country is geographically isolated as an island all the way in the edge of the map that I've looked at. I can relate to our Australian allies because I too grew up on an island, Long Island. So I know what it's like to have that thought in the back of your mind at all times, that there's only a few ways off this rock if shit's the fan. Us island folk need to stick together. That's true mateship right there. Australia, a nation of some 26 million people, can't always rely on uninterrupted deliveries from overseas suppliers, especially if there was a global crisis that disrupted the supply chain. Some weapons need to be made in-house. Given the fact that Australia has a massive maritime domain to watch over, their forces could be deployed as part of an amphibious landing to secure critical maritime choke points in regions like the Timor Sea or the Arafura Sea. These are critical for them to control the flow of goods into and out of their nation. Unlike a lot of other firearms, their AUG can be fired after being submerged in the water. On top of that, it strengthens their economy and creates skilled jobs by investing production into their own nation. And so in 1989, Australia officially adopted the AUG for mass production. This was no small thing. The infantry's weapon is a very personal thing. We name her, we maintain her, we keep her clean. We learn everything about our history and capabilities. The idea behind the AUG Bullpup concept, in general, is that by placing the receiver of the gun behind the trigger, you're able to have a longer rifle barrel in a shorter pack. But longer barrels translate to improved velocity of your rounds that you're firing, which in turn means you're likely to be more accurate, and the bullet is able to carry more energy behind it. All of this while having a shorter, more compact weapon. If your soldiers are getting out of the landing craft on a beach somewhere, or if they're jumping out of a cramped infantry fighting vehicle, it's an advantage. However, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. There were, of course, initial issues with the rifle. Sometimes it failed to fully lock when loaded with a full 30-round magazine. Usually soldiers state that bullpups have poor ergonomics, awkward trigger squeezes that aren't smooth for accurate shooting. Sometimes reloading and clearing malfunctions cannot be intuitive. And when you do it, you have to look down, taking your eyes off the battlefield.
So actually at the Austeyr Academy in the United States, they teach this. If you have a death jam, so like two bullets are basically trying to make their way through the feed ramp into the chamber, that is a pain in the ass to solve on an M4. But there's two ways you can do it on a Austeyr AUG really easily. You can either dump your magazine, and with your magazine dumped on the ground, you can lock your charging handle back and plunger your barrel, and it'll evacuate that jam and spit them out the bottom. Or with your magazine inserted, you can lock your barrel back or your charging handle back, disconnect your barrel, dump the rounds out, reinsert your barrel, and then you're ready to go.
Initial reports from soldiers in the field stated that the teething problems were ejection ports covers flying off, and the new space-age polymer housing would break under certain conditions. It would take 10 years for the AUG to see its first combat action, and you probably think that was during the Gulf War. But Australia mainly only sent ships for that in their navy. It surprisingly wasn't the 2003 Iraq War either. I learned there was a military intervention by Australia in 1999 called the International Force East Timor, led by 5,500 Australian service members. They were deployed to Timor following a violent period of unrest after the region voted for independence from Indonesia. This was Australia's largest overseas military deployment since the Vietnam War, and I feel like it's largely been forgotten by a lot of people around the world. The intervention involved armed engagements whose goal was to restore order and protect civilians, and there were several documented firefights during it. Australian forces conducted amphibious landing operations, deploying from naval vessels, and special forces flew in on helicopters onto the beaches near Dili. And you can see all of these Austeyr AUGs, these new rifles, in a lot of the photographs of the battles. These amphibious landings were crucial in establishing a secure foothold in the capital, facilitated rapid deployment of personnel and equipment. Then they were able to successfully restore order and protect civilians amid the crisis. Now that I think about it, that might be one of the last successful amphibious landing operations that I know of. This deployment led to major changes in the Australian defense policies, and it's said to have enhanced their ability to conduct operations outside the nation. It was kind of a dress rehearsal of sorts, because the AUG was about to be put to heavy use, as you might know. During the global war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan, the weapon was widely loved, but some of its teething problems would be further revealed. However, Australians aren't one to back down from a problem. Over its 3 decades of life, they would incrementally improve on the reliability and performance of the weapon and address some of its downsides.
Tell me a little bit about height over bore, I think it's called.
Yeah, so basically your height over bore, your barrel, the center of your barrel is your, bore. If you notice, there's about a few inches here where my optic is telling me, hey, you're on target here, but if I'm shooting close, my bullet doesn't have the trajectory to match with that crosshair essentially. And so if I'm shooting something within 25 yards, my bullet will be 2 inches below where my actual sight is. So it's a training thing you have to overcome. If you have the AUG with the flat top rail, it's the same as an M4.
The F-88 SA-1 went into service in 2003 in time for the Iraq War, which gave it a night vision aiming sight. 3 years later in 2006, Australian forces deployed again to peacekeeping operations in Timor, conducting another amphibious landing and engaging in more limited firefights. A few years later, they would be outfitted with the new F-88 SA-2 variant, which is an upgraded version and went into use starting in 2009. Based on all this sudden combat experience, starting in 2011, Australians started working on an improved version that would be entirely replace the original, called the EF-88, the enhanced one, which had a totally different look to it. By 2014, it went into full-rate production, delivering over 38,000 to their land forces. The EF-88 was even lighter weight by 500 grams, and its weight was better balanced towards the rear of the weapon. However, something that I found that was hilarious is just one example of the reasons why procurement is such a nightmare and a bureaucracy. It's the fact that the EF-88 didn't fit the existing mounting brackets inside their vehicles. According to SafeDefenseJournal.com, it cost them $5 million to modify the brackets to fit the new rifle. Not saying the EF-88 isn't dope, I'm just saying weapons procurement is wild. Unlike the M4, some versions of the AUG allow you to easily swap barrels. There are 3 interchangeable barrel lengths. You got your 20, 16, or 14 inch for close quarters combat. Most traditional rifles do not have the ability to swap barrels. From what I've seen, the EF-88 has a fixed barrel though, and doesn't allow for any of those quick field swaps. But this new version has cold hammer forged chrome lined barrels, which sounds really freaking cool, like Thor hammered it out in his shop. To me, that makes it sound like they handcrafted it by some medieval blacksmith in Australia. Or maybe my brain just goes there because I've been playing too much Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. The point of this step though is that a lot of rifles don't have that, and it makes the barrel last longer and have better precision accuracy. The thing that blew me away though when holding the AUG personally is its lightweight. Feels like a feather, or more accurately, it feels like you're holding the skeleton of a gun instead of a gun with a bunch of fat packed onto it. I had the pleasure of being able to use one with my buddy in Arizona, Spartan 117 GW. I have to admit, I am a Austeyr AUG enjoyer, even if it does get some hate online out there. So the new version, for example, weighs just over 3 kilograms or about 7 pounds. That made walking around and doing patrols with the rifle an absolute breeze. The way it achieves this is a mix of alloy, steel, polymer, and composite materials. But when you need to snap that selector to fire, it still sends the same high fire rate of 740 rounds per minute. My favorite vibe is an infantryman with a 40 mil underslung grenade launcher. I choose that loadout personally every time I get a chance in every first-person shooter video game or just any game. I do it without shame. I use that noob tube unapologetically, and it's never not satisfying. thumping some noob with it, but the original AUG had trouble mounting a nade launcher. Theoretically it could, and well, literally it could, but in practice, early attempts revealed some challenges with mounting that grenade launcher. Since the original AUG did not come with a factory standard grenade launcher option, mounting one required additional accessories and custom modifications. Have you ever tried attaching an M203 to an M4? Even that is a total bitch. The Bullpup layout meant that clearance and alignment issues would also come up, and that's why the Australian military came up with the special SL-40 underslung grenade launcher, which, according to sources I've read, can be attached extremely quickly in a minute, easier than even the M4. This is great news for me, because that means I'll be able to one-shot dudes in Call of Duty, even if they're way better than me. There were a bunch of other important changes we can't forget, though. To accommodate all these new optics, lasers, and boom accessories, the EF-88 has extended Picatinny rails. The upgrade focused on improving the trigger mechanism and gas system, so it attempted to address criticisms of the older F-88's performance. We've seen suppressors become one of the most need to have pieces of gear in the last few years, right? Every Marine infantryman has them. The new XM7 all comes with its standard suppressors. From what I've learned, it appears that the EF-88 has trouble getting the sound signature down below 140 dB because of its gas system.
Other problem, really kind of like a big downside, is this thing doesn't suppress well.
Why is that?
This is your gas system, and it's not really designed to be suppressed. There are gas suppressor plugs.
Oh, so the suppressor would have to also kind of go over this thing?
They tried that. There's a few companies that tried that. Basically, it would have like a little spout to capture the gas.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really work that well. What you have is something called suppressor pop. So when you suppress this, you have a jet of gas that comes out. And so all the noise reduction you get from a suppressor, you kind of have like this loud like vent hole here. It's not hearing safe, but it's not the full concussive force of a rifle.
But as with any primary rifle story, it's partly about performance for the grunt and partly about practicality. Since Australia has been manufacturing these for decades, they've enhanced the process to reduce build time significantly. My understanding is it only takes them 6 hours to build a new rifle now, which is down from the 11 hours required to build the old one. This has lowered production costs and allowed for faster delivery, and they may be considering switching or equipping all of them with the 68x51 similar to what the United States is using. Allow me to introduce you to their Land 159 program. It's the Australian Army's modernization program for small arms. It's like America's NGSW program that chose the XM7 to replace the M4, kinda. They plan to begin testing replacements for the current Bullpup this year in 2025. Already, an Australian-based defense company called Austeyr, I think I'm saying that right, even offered the SIG next-generation weapons to the Australian Army. Basically, from what I could gather, Austeyr is Sig Sauer's exclusive partner for the Australian Department of Defence's Land 159 program. It sounds to me like SIG is sending their XM7, XM250 to be trialed by the Australian and New Zealand military. However, it may not be over for the Bullpup just yet. Thales has already started producing both a Bullpup and a traditional rifle version of the weapon in case they wanted to go either way, which means we might get a cursed version of the Austeyr AUG that fires a giant 6.8 round. Some prototypes even have an integrated suppressor already built into it. The Austeyr AUG may be reaching the end of its life cycle with this new replacement program, but unless the replacement weapon is in a wildly famous movie, and unless it looks crazy futuristic, I have a feeling that it just won't hit the same.